In this video, we're going to review and compare the Audio-Technica AT2040 dynamic microphone against the Rode PodMic dynamic microphone. Both of these microphones are designed for broadcast, podcast, and live streaming, and that's exactly how we're going to review them in this video. Now, getting started, this review will make a whole lot more sense if you are wearing headphones. That way you get way more detail and clarity, and you can hear exactly what I'm hearing when I do the review. For the purposes of this review today, both microphones are mounted to a Rode PSA 1 Plus boom arm. The XLR cable is connected to the back of both microphones and run into our Rodecaster Duo. I think the Rodecaster Duo is the best audio mixer right now for podcasting and live streaming, so that's why I'm using it in this video. If you need more channels, you can also get the big brother to this, the Rodecaster Pro 2, and that will work for you as well. Now, probably the most important consideration for you is price. It does help to give a lot of context. We have links to the price down in the description below from a variety of online retailers to make sure that you can find the best price possible. But the price does go up and down over time and per region and per holiday season. So it's best just to reference the current price rather than me saying the price in this video. Next, let's take a look at some of the first impressions that we get with these microphones. For the Audio-Technica AT2040, the microphone itself has an all-metal design, has a metal grill, but it does have a plastic slip ring that it uses for the mount. They couldn't do metal on metal because that would scratch, but with this particular design, just the way it is, there is a plastic component that wraps all the way around the microphone. When we look at the Rode PodMic here, it's a big, heavy microphone. It's 900 and some grams, almost 2 pounds. It's solid metal. This is probably the most heavy and robust microphone that I have here in the studio. So in terms of build quality, I think it's great. In terms of looks, they do have a black version. If you get the USB version of it now, it's all black, which I think looks a little bit better on camera. But I don't think that the gray grill on this looks bad in any way. I think both of these microphones look professional and have a good first impression. They look like they belong in the studio. Next, when we're looking at how these microphones are mounted, the Audio-Technica AT2040 has that plastic mounting ring, like I said earlier. Then it goes to a plastic swivel mount with a tension screw there that you can tighten. It does come with a stand adapter, so this will fit no matter what boom arm or microphone stand that you're using. The plastic design here is the weak point of the microphone, in my opinion. When we looked at the Rode PodMic here, you can see this heavy metal design has a strong, robust yoke mount. This is a lot more flexible and robust compared to the Audio-Technica AT2040. And what's unique to the Rode PodMic is at the top of the mount here, it's just double tapped for both sizes, so you don't need a thread adapter at all. You can just screw in your boom arm like I have in this video, or if you're using a microphone stand, that will work as well. There's no loose parts whatsoever. It'll just work with both systems. All right, next let's take a look at the specs as a foundation for the rest of the review. So the Audio-Technica AT2040 is a dynamic XLR microphone with a hypercardioid polar pattern. This means that it is a bit more narrow on the polar pattern than the Rode PodMic. It's an end address microphone. You speak in the end of it. It has a frequency response of 80 Hz to 16 kHz. It has a sensitivity of minus 53 dB. It has a max SPL that is unpublished. It has a weight of 615 grams or 1.35 pounds. Now, when we compare this to the Rode PodMic, the Rode PodMic is also an XLR dynamic microphone. It has a cardioid polar pattern, so it's a little bit wider polar pattern than the AT2040. It's an end address microphone. It has a frequency response of 20 Hz to 20 kHz. It has a sensitivity of minus 57 dB. Like the AT2040, they don't publish the max SPL, and it weighs 937 grams, or roughly 2 pounds. Next, let's take a look at the frequency response charts for either microphone. Again, this gives you a really good idea of what to expect throughout the rest of this review and give you a better understanding of how we're going to compare and what you're actually listening to. So with the frequency response graph here on the AT2040, you can see that there's basically a high pass filter or a low cut from 100 Hz all the way down to the bottom of the frequency spectrum. This is pretty common, tidies up the sound of the microphone a little bit. Then it comes up and it's flat. It has a slight mid cut centered on 400 Hz, where it comes down about 1 dB or so. And then as we look in the upper mids here, this is really where we see what sets this microphone apart from a lot of other microphones. There's this big spike here centered on 3.5 kilohertz. You can see that it's plus 7 dB, which is pretty aggressive. So this will give it that really mid-forward sound. What they're aiming for here is to help you stand out among other sources to try provide more clarity in your recording. From there, it comes down, comes flat around 8K, and then drops off after 12K or so after that. Next, let's take a look at the Rode PodMic. You're going to see some similarities and some differences here. They have two frequency response graphs that they published. I'm just going to quickly show you both of them. One of them is just a bit more exaggerated. Here you can see that they basically have a high pass filter again, so they have that low cut, getting rid of some of those lower end frequencies that would be in a subwoofer. You don't really need a vocal mic rattling somebody's subwoofer. But here you see a big spike centered on about 150 hertz that goes up about 5 or 6 dB here. So they're trying to really bolster that low end. Then there's a low mid cut here centered on about 400 hertz or so. Now you can notice that the scale, these vertical lines are shifting. So they're trying to give you more detail into certain areas here. But then there is a spike around 900 hertz, then a cut, and then from 4,000 hertz to 10,000 hertz, you can see that it's really sculpted here. They're really targeting some frequencies before it rolls off on the high end. If we take a look at the other frequency response graph that they published, it's the same thing. It's just a bit more exaggerated on the axis here. So you can see really how big these cuts are. If you hear somebody talk about a V-shaped microphone, this is what they're talking about. There's a big low end push and a big high end push, and it creates a V shape on the frequency response graph. So that's what they're talking about. That's the only reason I'm showing you this graph. I think we covered all the points, but I just want you to know what that V shape looks like because it's more exaggerated in this version of the graph here. Okay, so far you've been listening to this whole recording with both microphones about a fist away from my microphone. They're both tilted in at an angle here. The reason I do that is so I'm not breathing into the microphone because that can cause plosives. Now we're going to quickly test the plosives on these microphones. In a worst case scenario, I'm just going to look right in the microphone, make a bunch of P and B sounds. Peter put peanut butter on his pineapple pizza. 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 Next, this is how the frequency response changes when you get really close to the Audio-Technica AT2040. Next, this is how the frequency response changes when you're about 4 inches away from the Audio-Technica AT2040. Next, this is how the frequency response changes when you're about a foot away from the Audio-Technica AT2040. Next, this is how the frequency response changes when you're right up next to the Rode PodMic. This is how the frequency response changes when you're looking into the Rode PodMic at about 4 inches away. And this is how the Rode PodMic sounds when you're about a foot away from the microphone. Next, I'm using a keyboard and mouse here for a background noise test of the Audio-Technica AT2040. Next, I'm using a keyboard and mouse here for a background noise test of the Rode PodMic. Next, I'm rustling some paper behind the Audio-Technica AT2040 to simulate some sort of paper shuffling throughout a podcast recording. Next, I'm rustling some paper here to simulate some rustling during your podcast recording when you're listening to the Rode PodMic. This is what it sounds like when you speak directly into the Audio-Technica AT2040. This is what it sounds like when you speak into the side of the Audio-Technica AT2040. This is what it sounds like when you speak behind the Audio-Technica AT2040. This is what it sounds like when you speak into the front of the Rode PodMic. This is what it sounds like when you speak into the side of the Rode PodMic. This is what it sounds like when you speak behind the Rode PodMic. Throughout your podcast or live stream, if you need to adjust your microphone, this is what the handling noise sounds like with the Audio-Technica AT2040. Throughout your podcast recording, if you need to adjust your Rode PodMic, this is what it sounds like if you're adjusting the Rode PodMic. If you do end up tapping or bumping the Audio-Technica AT2040, this is what it sounds like. If you do end up tapping or bumping the Rode PodMic, this is what it sounds like throughout your recording. This is what the Audio-Technica AT2040 sounds like when we have a generic dynamic microphone processing setup on the Rodecaster Pro. This will add EQ, the big bottom, some compression, and a de-esser. This is what it sounds like when we use the same generic processing for the dynamic microphone inside the Rodecaster Duo. This is not the specific Rode PodMic processing setup. This is the same setup that I'm putting on the AT2040, so you can compare how a generic audio setup sounds like with some EQ, the big bottom, compression, and a de-esser. Okay, so the processing is turned off for both microphones again, and now it's time for a blind test. No, no, it's not the computers. The computers were fine, and the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is indeed 42. The problem is that nobody knew what the question was. No, no, it's not the computers. The computers were fine, and the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is indeed 42. The problem is that nobody knew what the question was. Okay, so I just finished editing everything so far, and let's talk about it so far. So, in terms of my three deal breakers, build quality, I think both of them are within an acceptable window. There's a little bit of plastic on the mount of the AT2040, and the Rode PodMic is built like a tank. I think the Rode PodMic has better build quality, but they're both within the same window. Next, in terms of plosives, I think both of them could benefit from having a windscreen or pop filter or foam cover on them. I just think it'll cover you and make your recording extra safe, especially in something like a podcast where it's extra dynamic and you just don't want to worry about it and you don't know who's grabbing what microphone and how they're going to use it. Uh, Foam cover will definitely help get you a better result, but not maybe required. Next, we have the handling noise. So the AT2040 is brutal for handling noise. You shouldn't be able to hear that much sound when you're moving it. The Rode PodMic is a lot better. It's not a secret that you're moving the microphone. It doesn't have to be dead quiet. It just can't be booming in everybody's ear. This is a little bit excessive. Even with the typing test, you could hear the resonance go through the table, through the stand, and into the Audio-Technica AT2040. That's just way too much. So for me, that would exclude the AT2040 on that alone. But let's keep going. So the AT2040 does sound more broadcasty, but that mid push is a little bit excessive to me. So if you really like that sound, then you can go for it on the AT2040 and try EQ it a little bit to fit your needs. For me personally, when comparing these two microphones specifically, the Rode PodMic does sound more natural, more open, more clear, easier to listen to for a long period of time. There was a little bit of sibilance and stuff in there, especially with my voice. I could hear it sometimes, but the foam windscreen would help dumb down some of those upper frequencies a little bit as well. So I do think that's probably the way to go. So what's my overall recommendation here? I think the AT2040 is unusable because of the handling noise. If you're doing a podcast or a live stream, in a podcast especially, you don't know who's going to use the microphone or if they're going to be nervous or if they're new to audio and they don't know not to touch the microphone. I think if you have this going on throughout your recording, that's just a deal breaker in my opinion. Even with a boom arm, it sounds like that. Other than that, the tone between the two is subjective, but my preference is towards the tone of the Rode PodMic. I do think it's easier to listen to for a long period of time, even though the AT2040 does kind of have more of that podcasty, broadcasty vibe that some people look for. My preference is for the Rode PodMic. That being said, you've heard everything that I've heard in this recording, and you can make up your own mind. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions about this or you want to see a different microphone comparison, please leave a comment down in the comment section below. Again, if you are looking for current pricing or specs from a variety of online retailers, we have some links down in the description below. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.